It's time to get wired in. It's time to talk about some code, software development, or just random stuff in general. So, today I want to talk about AngularJS. Last weekend, I decided to learn a new framework. So I decided to learn Angular because I said, you know what? This is a pretty popular framework. I'm not really a web developer, so I wanted to do something to get out of my comfort zone. I'm not really a front end. Well, I'm a full stack developer in the mobile space because, you have to do the front end and I do the back end. But as far as on the web, I'm not really a JavaScript guy. And JavaScript is really an easy language to pick up. It's really not hard. I've only used basic JavaScript. I've never really used the frameworks like that. Maybe jQuery, but usually when I build web applications, they were so simple and straightforward. I just needed to use JavaScript. So I said, you know what? I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to learn a new framework, because if you keep using the same technologies, you get bored and, it gets repetitive. It's like, working a job. When you go to work every day, and you're using the same technologies, it gets boring after a while. And that's why a lot of people hate their job. They hate coding because they think, I'm going to build cool things. I can use whatever technology I want, but you have to use the technologies they want. And usually you're just maintaining code and maybe building new features, but it's not really any fun because if a new technology comes out, you're like, oh man, I want to try this. You probably won't use it every day. But you can still learn it on your free time and just build some cool projects. So it's kind of what I did. But I'm looking to implement Angular into some of my new projects because on the last podcast, I talked about progressive web apps. And I started watching a lot of conferences, a lot of videos of people talking about progressive web apps. I've mentioned, I think progressive web apps will advance more in the future. I think businesses will use progressive web apps over native apps. I think native apps will still be necessary, but you can listen to my thoughts on that on the previous episode. So, as I'm sitting here thinking about getting into progressive web apps, I'm like, cool, what can I do? So I started looking at React, Angular, just HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pick up Angular. So here's a little backstory about how I got into Angular. This isn't really my first time. So in 2015, when I was contracting, I noticed companies started including AngularJS in the requirements. And, I'm a Java developer, back-end Java, but Angular started becoming popular more in the enterprise world. And I'm just like, okay, what's this about? So I think I started using Angular 1. It was Angular 1 at the time. Angular 2, I think, was released in 2016, I believe. I think there's like version 8 right now. I think the version actually started based on the tutorials probably like 5 or 6. I don't even remember. So many versions. But anyway, I started using Angular a little bit, playing around with it. And I said, okay, this isn't too bad. And then I did a little hackathon with the mean stack. And if you don't know what the mean stack is, it's Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. I can't remember what application I built. It had to do something with, I think, keeping a track of books I had in the library or something like that. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Didn't really continue diving more into Angular because the job requirements after that really didn't require me to know much about Angular. I was just interested because I came across this on a lot of job listings. So I hear about Angular all the time. I hear, Microsoft talk about Angular. I hear different companies, they're using Angular on their website. So I'm seeing Angular everywhere. And I said, you know what? Let's see what Angular is about. And I would look at the documentation here and there, just kind of look at it. And it's changed a lot. So Saturday I said, you know what? I'm going to load up Angular. I looked at the documentation, looked at the tutorial, how to get started. And it's really easy to create an Angular project. I mean, you can use the command line interface to just create your project and get started. You can download Node. It tells you how to install Node. And I recommend installing Node because that way you can easily just test the site on the local host. You can just test it in the browser. And I use Visual Code as my text editor. Visual Code is the best, by the way. It really is. Like, it's damn near a full-fledged IDE. So I set up my project and I noticed that there were a lot of files and I'm like, holy shit, what is all this stuff? So I actually have the project open. So I'm just going to kind of talk about it. So I'm like really overwhelmed in a sense because when I first started using Angular, I didn't remember seeing all this stuff. I didn't really remember seeing components and like routing modules. Now I know they had routing, but you had to create all these files yourself, but there was just so many other files. Like, where's one that I didn't remember? I'm looking right now. It actually sets up your CSS files and creates an index. AngularJS. I was like, what is this? So let me open this. And this is where you can add all your dependencies. And I'm like, okay, I get it. So I come from a Java C# background, kind of used to adding dependencies. So I'm like, oh, okay. So let me exit out of that. So the first thing I noticed, it created a folder. It's a source folder. And you have node modules folder and a lot of different like subfolders inside. And you have a bunch of other files under in the main folder. So in the source folder, you have an app folder, and that's where it has, the three files, the app.component HTML, app.component.ts, app.module.ts, and TS is for TypeScript because Angular uses a lot of TypeScript. And here's another thing. I've never used TypeScript until Saturday. So that was really new to me. But TypeScript is all it is just JavaScript, right? I think Microsoft uses TypeScript if I'm not mistaken, or it's their version. Don't quote me on that. So let's look at the file. So you have component .css. Wait, oh no, I think I created that. Oh, I'm sorry. App component. And this is basically an empty file. This is where you can style your CSS. Okay, cool. And then you have app component.html, and this is the main page that actually interacts with. This is the HTML page. Now, when I first saw this, I'm looking at this. Now, I do understand some Angular It has the welcome to, and then it has the title and expressions, which is the double curly braces. So I knew that was an expression, but I'm like, okay, where is this coming from? And then you have app test, and I'm like, what is, oh, I think I created app test, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, because I created, another component called test. So I think I was just playing around. So, but I think it's called app something else before this. But anyway, and it's just like a tag, and I'm like, what does this mean? So then when you go to the app component, when you go to the TypeScript, which I'm going to open up, and let me close this. Makes sense. Oh, it was app root. That's what it was in the when you first open the project, it's going to be app root, and that's in the component, and it's in the selector, and what these are basically are decorators, and that basically marks a class as an Angular class. So when you have an app component, yeah. So you have the selector, which is app root, and then you have the template URL, and then you have the style URLs, and basically those URLs are automatically generated, and when you run the command line. So run them in the command line, which is app component.html. That's the template URL. Style URL is .app.component.css, and the name convention is usually, whatever you want to name the component.html. So I like the naming convention of that. And then I notice here in the class, you have title. They said title equals, and I think it was Angular, but I changed this to something else. And you can use that expression, and you can call that expression in HTML. But also I noticed too in the component, you can actually type HTML code. I think you changed this to template. Instead of template URL, if you just use template, you can type HTML code. And if you don't want to go back and forth between the TypeScript file and the HTML file, you can do that with the same thing with the styles, CSS style page as well. So then I created another one and started playing around with it. Let me open this up. So, matter of fact, let me close everything because I have too many tabs open and it's confusing. So you can call it whatever you want, test.component or myapp.component.css.html. And I actually started typing some HTML, some CSS in the file, and it works. It's a lot to me, it's a lot easier to have things in separate files. I think that's the purpose of having components, right? A component allows you to reuse your code, reuse certain elements, HTML elements. Like, why keep writing this over and over? Why have boilerplate code? So one thing I like about Angular, like I said, when I first ran the command, I was like, wow, what's all this stuff? But it's actually pretty simple. It's really, really simple. And coming from a Java world, when you look at a project, it makes it easier, especially a Java framework like Spring. Like, it promotes like modularity. I can't even say the word. Modularity. See it, a tongue twister right there. But basically, you break your project into separate modules. And that's what Angular promotes. And when I used Angular in 2015, it wasn't this mature. So I started playing around with expressions. I started creating methods and expressions. I started doing data binding. Data binding is basically synchronization between the view and the model. You do two-way data binding, so if you're typing in the text, it can appear on the, as you type. Another thing I looked at, dependency injection. Well, I knew Angular, one of the major features when I started learning, what really got me into wanting to learn Angular was dependency injection, because I was introduced to the dependency injection design pattern when I started using the Spring framework in Java. And basically, dependency injection allows you to inject code. It makes it more clean. It makes it reusable. So, for example, instead of hard coding everything, you can just inject it. So if you make a change in the code of the component that you're injecting, you don't have to hard code everything. It doesn't matter. So it makes it easy to reuse, a lot easier to reuse components, transfer values. I'm really a big fan of dependency injection. So like in Java, you don't have to keep creating new instances of a new class. You can just inject these values in methods, constructors. I think here I used it in the constructor. So I'm a big fan of dependency injection. Another thing that I'm really curious, and I haven't played around with it yet, but I did some reading on it, is services. That's where you have all your business logic. And I'm also going to consume my next small project I'm going to create, because I write a lot of APIs to handle my backend. I write a lot of RESTful APIs to handle backend for my mobile apps. So it's only appropriate that Angular is a front-end framework that to handle the storing data to the database. All I need to do is consume that service, and it makes it and Angular makes it easy. You can do it over HTTP. So I'm going to play around with that. And you can build full functional websites using Angular. You can just focus on building nice dynamic content. It offers data binding, dependency injection. I think Angular is a really good framework to learn, especially if you're coming from a C# or Java background. I'm about to try to say it again. It promotes modularity. I think I said it right this time. So that will help you really grasp Angular really quick. It's almost like looking at a Java project, in a sense. And you can use Angular in, Spring. I've seen some projects where people would write a Spring Boot backend and, connect that to their Angular front end project. So I think I might try that as well. That should be pretty fun. So I might use Spring Boot, write my backend, my REST service, and connect that to my Angular project through over HTTP. And I think Angular is probably going to be one of the technologies. I can't say it's going to be the main technology, because I want to, expand my toolbox. So I'm going to also learn React and Vue, and there's a lot of JavaScript frameworks. So I am going to learn other JavaScript frameworks as well. I think, when you learn a new technology, new framework, it brings new life. It always keeps the excitement of just writing code and building software, because you expand your toolbox, and you add another programming language or framework to your arsenal, and it makes you a better problem solver. It's not just about learning the language. Oh, I just know a new language. If a client approaches you and say, hey, I need A, B, and C done, you know what tools to use to get the job done. So if you want to build a progressive web app, I think Angular is the way to go. Now, there are other web frameworks that I think support Angular. I think Ionic is one. Yeah, I think Ionic is a framework where you can build native mobile apps, and I think it uses Angular and TypeScript. So I might build native and progressive apps using Ionic. I think you can use, well, I know you can use React Native to build native apps, and I think you can package them as progressive web apps. I'm not too sure. But you can use Angular and React. Seems like Angular and React are like the most popular JavaScript frameworks. I see a lot of people talking about it on Twitter. I see a lot of other developers they really talk about Angular and React, and I'm always seeing the comparison of which one is better. I think Angular might be a little complex because I looked at some React code. I think it just makes it a lot easier to use components in HTML, but I think Angular offers a little bit more. But I'm going to see. I'm going to create a project in React, and I think I'm going to build some full applications, and I'm going to post them on GitHub. I mean, full-fledged applications, and I'm going to like post them and maybe open source them, and you can download the code and use it as a reference. Maybe it'll help you out. But I really enjoyed, just playing around with Angular, and this little mini hackathon, I guess, it wasn't about me really just building a project. It was more so just really getting to understand the environment, what you can and can't do with Angular, just reading constantly, like reading and learning about it, writing down ideas. Usually when I learn a new technology, what I'll do is I'll play around with the language or framework, and I'll come up with ideas, different use cases, realistic use cases, and I'll write them down and say, you know what, this is a project I want to work on. So I have a couple projects that I want to build using Angular, and I'm going to share those, and some projects will be commercial projects. So I'm looking forward to it. I think I recommend this framework. So if you haven't learned Angular, or if you have, start learning it. Start learning new technologies in general. Like even if you're using Angular, if you have time, learn React, learn Vue, learn TypeScript, there's a lot of JavaScript. I think Ember, that's a JavaScript framework. Use Polymer. That's another JavaScript framework. That's more component based, I believe. So just learn much as you can, because you might love Angular, but like I'm going to reiterate again, you might look at React as the better option to solve this problem. So it's just always good to just keep learning. Next, I'm going to get into machine learning, and I'm going to learn. There's just so much to learn in this field. Like you can't get bored. The only way you get bored with coding is if you're just doing the same repetitive shit every day. It can get boring. You gotta constantly have that hunger to learn. That's how you know if you're really passionate about your field. You always want to excel and get better at it. Things are changing all the time. Hell, by next week we'll probably be on Angular version 10. I think they're on version 8 or 9. I think it's version 8. So that's it. That's all I want to talk about. I just want to talk about Angular and my thoughts on it. And like I said, I recommend you learn it. Just learn in general. So I think I might work on some of my web projects and implement Angular. I have a few web projects that I have out, and I think I'm going to tune them to start using Angular, connecting to my backend service using HTTP. But you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Appavelli. you can visit the website, pragmaticdevsolutions.com, appabelly.com. If you have questions, you can contact me on social media or just hit me up on my website. I would love to just talk about random topics. If you have questions, don't be afraid to ask me a question, and I'll answer the question. I want to reach out to other developers too. I want to interview other developers and hear about their journey, and I want to give them an opportunity to talk about their projects that they're working on. I really want to build, especially indie devs. I actually want to interview developers who are more knowledgeable about the Angular framework than I am, so I can learn from them too, and we all can learn. So I'm going to try to reach out to some people and see if I can work something out and get them on the show and interview some people. I think it'd be cool to just talk to some different people. So till next time, stay wired in, stay locked in, stay focused, and write some code. And I am out.